Hello, I am Dr. Estanislao of the Center for Excellence in Governance here in the Philippines. As you can see, I am getting on with age. I will be 82 in a couple of days. And at least in the Philippines, we're entering the election season. So I've asked, what can an old person share with his fellow citizens as we go through another period when we have to choose our national officials? And I have been reminding myself every day at prayer that Christ actually wants us to transform our world. In our case, would want us to transform the Philippines. Not just through prayer. Prayer is very important, and the sacraments are very important. But for many of us, mainly through the work we do, the family life we live, and the social interaction we have with friends, colleagues, neighbors, and fellow citizens. But the question to ask is, how do we in fact make a transformative difference for our people, for our country, for all Filipinos? This is a big question which oftentimes is left up there in the clouds and hardly brought down into real action on the ground. Now, in my case, what has become very clear is an inspiration that I got from Saint Josemaria. An expression he had was hacer, hacer, which in my very poor Spanish I translate simply into share a dream. Share a dream with others and let them get to do things on their own in order to realize that dream. All of this can be very nice. It sounds very good. But in my case, how do you actually get it done? In a country which has been struggling for many decades, I would even say for many centuries, on how to lift ourselves up from the clutches of poverty, the clutches of underdevelopment, and above all, the clutches of a lack of hope and a commitment to shape the future. And that question has been in my mind for many decades now. And three things have become very clear over these past several decades that I've been addressing that question. I'd like to share these three things together with you today. The first, it is not enough to get excited about today and tomorrow only. You have a country to build. You have a nation to develop. We have future generations of Filipinos to whom we have to hand on a great legacy away from poverty, higher levels of development, and higher levels of personal dignity and national respectability. So we cannot limit our focus only on today or tomorrow. You have to think about 2030, 2040, 2050. In Glasgow, they were all focused on what do we need to do today in order to save the world from a catastrophe that can happen in 2050. Second, it is not enough to get excited about elections. Elections come, and on a day we vote. After that, what do we do? What about the period in between elections, which could be once every 6 years if you talk about the president, or once every 3 years when you talk about your congressman and other local officials? Voting is for 1 day. The period in between voting and between elections is 3 years or 6 years. And third, it is not enough to focus on what government will do for us. All of us will have to do our fair share. And that's why the famous expression coming from Saint Josemaria, a third, a third. Let's have a dream, but all together, let us work in order to realize that dream. Now you might be asking, we've been through this before. Actually, in the 1970s, after martial law was declared, there were a group of very brilliant communicators, with some of those individuals who are always optimistic about the prospects of the Philippines. They put up a good TV program which was entitled 1980, Take Me There. But it was too focused on the short term, 7 years. It was too focused on one man, on the President of the Philippines with dictatorial powers. And it was too focused on what government can do for us. Now we already know the 1980s to which we have been taken. It is something that we should not allow to be repeated again. So if we're not going to repeat 1980, Take Me There, and the actual reality of the 1980s actually being taken into, we being taken into the actual 1980s, what do we have to do? Perhaps to consider a little bit more deeply the three perspectives that I've shared with you. It is not enough to focus on the here and now, on the short term. It's not enough to focus on elections, and it is not enough to focus on what government alone can do for us. What does it take? Nothing less than the transformation of our country. What does it take to transform our country? Actually, this idea came to me when I started experimenting for the establishment of the Center for Research and Communication. In 1967, I started experimenting. 1968, we actually formally set up CRC, which is the forerunner of the University of Asia and the Pacific. And what was that idea? To transform this country, we need to build strong institutions. And of the institutions that we have, we need to strengthen them. And actually, that idea became very clear and very concrete with me when I was given the task to rehabilitate the Development Bank of the Philippines. It was institution building. And it became even clearer to me when I was given major responsibility in rehabilitating our national finances through the Department of Finance and the Monetary Board. And it also became very clear later on when I set up the Institute for Corporate Directors, which is focused on corporate governance of business corporations, and the Institute for Solidarity in Asia, which is focused on precisely strengthening our public sector institutions. And what have I seen over these past several years? That it is possible to strengthen Philippine institutions it is possible to build new institutions that can help other institutions to strengthen themselves. Take a look at, for example, the work that we've done in ISA. We have proven that, in fact, government institutions can clean themselves up, can professionalize themselves, and elevate themselves to global standards to a point where they can get recognized by such a global collaborative as Palladium, which was put up by the 2 Harvard professors from the business school who were responsible for the balanced scorecard. And you know what? They elevated the city of Iloilo into their Hall of Fame. You might be surprised. They elevated the Philippine Army and the Philippine Navy into their Hall of Fame. And these were not the only Philippine institutions brought up to that highest level of distinction. And as I speak today, I can tell you, I am very actively engaged in cleaning up our Bureau of Customs, one of the most corrupt government agencies, according to all perception surveys. Now, they're in the process of finishing the first phase of the transformation program, and they'll come out with a public report in March that they have become clean, relatively corruption-free, a professionally run organization, and a caring organization to such a point that even the importers and exporters that they serve are talking well about them. So I stand before you today in order to say, yes, transformation is possible right here in the Philippines. And we have many examples of such successful transformation stories. However, it is not enough to transform oneself, since transformation cannot be focused only on the short term. It has to be a long-term process. Therefore, transformation has to be sustained. But how may it be sustained so that the outcomes that finally will be delivered will really be game-changing to such an extent that it can help change the face and the fate of our country and of our people. So, the sustainability of a transformation program. How is it done? No other formula from one institution to the next, from one national government agency to the next, from one Philippine corporation to the next, from one LGU to the next. I've been privileged that just the other day, I was the chair of the Board of Judges to select, under the auspices of Phoenix, the CFO of the Year. And we had the privilege of interviewing 3 finalists. All these candidates, and the eventual winner was the CFO of PLDT, showed what in fact can be done to transform institutions even during the lockdown and the pandemic. So what is the formula for sustaining transformation? The first, any transformation program will have to be cascaded and brought down to the level of individuals working in the institution. It is not enough to say, well, okay, great, PLDT is going to be this and this. No, you've got to bring it down to the last individual who works there. And what do we do with those individuals? In fact, make sure that the governance and transformation discipline is comprehensive. It affects their mind, mental health, their body, physical health, their heart, their commitment, their hands, their skills, their capability, their professional capacity, and no less important, the spirit, which is the foundation of ethics and morals brought down to their places of work, to their respective families, and to the social networks that they maintain. Such that, in fact, every individual within a transforming institution becomes a much better all-around person. Second, in effect, the transformation discipline will have to be brought down to the level of the working teams. We had this wonderful experience in the city of Balanga, also elevated into the Hall of Fame. By the way, for those of you who do not know where the city of Balanga is, it is in the province of Bataan. Small city, but having transformed itself mainly through the work of small teams in City Hall, who eventually reported, after they gained the Hall of Fame distinction coming from Palladium, a global collaborative, they said the secret of our success was that many individuals in small teams were given the opportunity to shine, to show their wares, to make a difference in the efficiency with which all of the internal systems of City Hall could be brought up to very high standards of efficiency. Teamwork for efficiency, so that the entire operational system of the institution becomes truly world-class. And third, that every institution that goes through a transformation worries about the external value chain with which it operates. I just got out of a seminar required by the SEC, and there were various speakers and so on. And one speaker was particularly talking about climate change and how it applies to the Philippines. Another speaker from the Bangko Sentral ng Filipinas was talking about how they're in fact developing the entire financial system under conditions of the pandemic. And you know, virtually all of the speakers were talking about we cannot do this alone. We'll have to do the whole of nation approach. We'll have to do it with all of our stakeholders and get them engaged with us in making sure that the external value chain works very well, and in making sure that, in fact, the environment in which everybody operates gets to be better. I have this wonderful experience of the Philippine Marines working together with the local community. And at some point, they had to be yanked out because the place had already been pacified and therefore considered risk-free, and therefore there was no need for the Marines to be stationed there. And as they were pulling out, the local community made a petition. No, don't get the Marines to get out of here. Why? Because their community projects have been very successful and highly appreciated by the people. Wonderful. This is what we need to do. The Philippine Heart Center, with which we had been working, is a fantastic example of a Philippine institution that has transformed itself. But after having done so, it made sure that it infects, like a virus, other public hospitals. Now, we're working with more than 40 or so public hospitals, so that, in fact, the entire public health system can be positively affected in the near future. So these are the three requirements for a sustained transformation program. Cascade it down to the last individual, make sure that the working teams are working very effectively, and then there's an outreach program for the entire community. I guess what I'm really saying is that it can be done. We can transform the country, and what we will accomplish will be that we're not going through business as usual, focused on the short term, focused on elections, focused on who the next president of the Philippines is going to be. All of these things are very important. But that if that is all of our concern, we're not going to transform the Philippines. What we need to do is to have a different mindset, which is very different from business as usual, which is the sustainability of a transformation program from one institution to the other. And what does it lead to? This change that we're talking about, nothing less than this: the transformation of the Filipino, making the Filipino an all-around better person. The transformation by the Filipino, working in teams, raising the standards of efficiency and effectiveness of all the operating systems that we have in this country. And finally, the transformation for the Filipino, that finally no one is going to be left behind below the poverty line, and everybody moves up way above the poverty line. That is a dream we can work for. It can be done. Transformation is possible. But transformation has to be sustained with the involvement of you and me, the strengthening of every institution that we have, and making sure that we get these three very important results: transformation of the Filipino, by the Filipino, and for the Filipino. Thank you.